Thank you for joining us today for SmartSAVER's introductory webinar on education savings for children involved with child welfare. My name is May Wong. I'm the Executive Director of the Omega Foundation, the parent of SmartSAVER, and I'll be moderating today's session. You should now be able to see the agenda. If you can't, then please email us at info@smartsaver.org or use the Q&A box on your screen to let us know so that we can help you. We have a great lineup of speakers for you today, and we'll also leave plenty of time for questions and discussions following their presentations. SmartSAVER's only goal is to improve children's and families' access to registered education savings plans and the Canada Learning Bond. Prior to our national launch in January, a 3-year pilot of SmartSAVER in Toronto taught us that, working in collaboration with the federal government, with financial institutions, and with the community agencies that families know and trust, we can improve access and participation in these beneficial saving programs. We hope our new online application that we'll introduce you to today will help to facilitate this collaboration. Partnering with 6 financial institutions, including RBC, all of whom are committed to starting accounts for families at no cost, and with a growing number of community partners, our goal is to push the reach of the bond from 29% of eligible children now to 40% in 5 years' time. We hope that after this session, you too will choose to work with the online application to ensure that the eligible children you care about receive their Canada Learning Bond. Just a heads up, this session is being recorded so that we can share it with you and others later. Now to introduce us to education savings and the Canada Learning Bond opportunity, I'd like to turn it over to Fernand Comeau, Director, Program Design, Learning Branch, Employment and Social Development, Canada.
Thanks very much, May, for the introduction, and thanks to SmartSAVER for setting up today's session. As May mentioned, my name is Fernand Comeau. I'm the Director of Program Design with the Canada Education Savings Program. Et puis avant d'aller plus loin, je voulais simplement mentionner que même si le webinaire, cette session est en anglais, vous pouvez me poser des questions évidemment en français si vous voulez. Et aussi les diapositives sont disponibles en français si vous voulez voir dans la langue de votre choix. As May mentioned today, I'm going to talk to you about the Canada Learning Bond and specifically how it relates to kids in care. But first I'm going to talk a little bit about the Canada Education Savings Program and the range of federal education savings incentives that we provide. I'll get into a bit more detail about the Canada Learning Bond and then outline some opportunities and some benefits that the bond provides to kids generally and specifically to kids in care. On the Canada Education Savings Program, so what is it? We're a program with the federal government that encourages early planning and saving for a kid's post-secondary education, specifically by providing financial incentives to use RESPs, so Registered Education Savings Plans. RESPs grow tax-free, so the savings that are put in there are in a sense protected. They grow tax-free until the time of withdrawal, so saving early, and even if it's a little bit, can mean significantly more money that a child will have to pay, will have available to pay for education after high school. Getting into a few of the details, what incentives do we provide? So there are in fact 3. So the first is the Canada Education Savings Grant. Now the grant is a universal grant, so what happens is the money that's contributed into the RESP, the federal government will add 20% on those contributions. There are some parameters and some limits. It's 20% on the first $2,500 that's saved each year, and there's a lifetime maximum of $7,200. Now, for families that are in modest income households, there's the second incentive, which is the additional grant. And the way that that works is that we offer an additional 10% on the first $500 saved, or $50. And for low-income families, we offer an extra 20% on the first $500 that's saved. That's an extra $100. The third incentive that we offer is the Canada Learning Bond. And the Canada Learning Bond is a little bit different. It's specifically for kids who were born on or after January 1st, 2004, and specifically for kids who are from low-income families or in the care of a public agency. And we'll get into the details in a little bit. The way that it works is $500 in the first year of eligibility. So an RESP is opened, the child is eligible for the bond, $500 is deposited. Now, an additional $100 is also deposited for each previous year of eligibility. So if a child is, let's say, 5 years old and was eligible for all 5 previous years, those 5 $100 installments are also going to be deposited. Subsequently, there's an additional $100 added each year that the child remains eligible. So again, each year $100 is added if the child is still eligible, right up to the age of 15. So the maximum is a $2,000 contribution into the RESP. And remember, no contribution is required for the bond. Now, there are provincial incentives as well, Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, and Quebec, but we can get into that as needed. So a little bit of focus specifically on the CAN Learning Bond. So once again, $500 paid directly in the first year that the child is eligible. Now there's also $25 that's added in, that's deposited, to cover any administrative fees that the financial institution that opens the RESP might charge. Typically, and there are exceptions to this, the financial institution will waive that fee and just keep the $25 in the account for the RESP. Once again, $100 each year of eligibility, right up till the age of 15. $100 each year of previous eligibility. So remember, the CAN Learning Bond is retroactive. And in terms of the lifetime maximum, $2,000. Again, no contribution is required. Specifics on the eligibility. So I mentioned before, the child has to have been born on or after January 1st, 2004. That means that currently the oldest eligible child is 11 years old. The child's family receives either the National Child Benefit Supplement, which is also known as the baby bonus, or the child is in care and receives the Children's Special Allowance. So that's the other criteria that defines low income. Moving ahead, here's how things work in terms of the child and welfare context. So the Children's Special Allowance Act and the Income Tax Act actually permit child welfare agencies to open an RESP on behalf of the children in care. So the kids are eligible to receive the CAN Learning Bond. The other thing to note, though, is that those children will also be eligible for 40% Canada Education Savings Grant match rate on the first $500 contributed. And what that's about is, remember, there's the universal grant that provides 20%, but there's also an additional grant that will add an extra 10 or 20% on the first $500. Well, in the context of children in care, they'll count as low income, and so they will definitely get the additional 20%, which totals 40% on the first $500. And we can get into the math later on if you like. And finally, depending on where you're located, there may be provincial grants that are also available. Now, the Children's Special Allowance Act payments can be contributed to the RESP, and they will attract federal grant dollars. So that's another appealing proposition, if you will, in terms of helping a child in care's RESP savings grow. If you look at the comparison between a traditional subscriber and the situation for a child in care, this gets a little bit technical, but you'll see the distinction on the slide here. On the left-hand side is the context of kids in care, where we're talking about a public primary caregiver, and on the right-hand side is the primary caregiver or the parent. So that's your traditional setting where you'll have, let's say, a parent opening up an RESP for their child. So if you compare the two, there are some differences. On the left-hand side, if the child welfare agency would receive the Children's Special Allowance, those are known as public primary caregivers. In the traditional context, you'll have parents who receive the National Child Benefit Supplement. They are known as the primary caregivers. Now, in the context of kids in care, to apply for the Canada Learning Bond, the agencies have to provide their business number, whereas a parent and a subscriber has to provide the social insurance number. In the case of kids in care, the public primary caregiver is always a subscriber, whereas in a traditional family setting, the primary caregiver doesn't necessarily have to be the subscriber, and we can get into that. One thing that both contexts have in common, though, the child social insurance number is required in both scenarios. In terms of how the picture looks in Canada in terms of children in care and some of the statistics that we have here at the program in our admin data, so since 2005, when the Canada Learning Bond was introduced, over 10,000 kids in care have received it. The majority of these kids are in Alberta, which is almost 3,000 kids, and in Ontario, which is over 7,000 kids. Alberta's reported that 7,054 kids were in care as of December 2014, and in 2012-13, Ontario reported that nearly 25,000 kids in care are in children's aid societies. So you can see that there's still, even in Alberta and Ontario, some room for growth. In terms of the opportunities provided by the Canada Learning Bond, there are opportunities that are obviously financial, so a child would have better financial preparation and financial readiness to be able to attend post-secondary education, but there are also some non-financial benefits. In particular, there's some American research that's found a beautifully strong link between assets that are held in the name of a child and participation in post-secondary education. And there's further research that finds that a child from a low-income or a moderate-income family with assets in his or her name is actually 4 times more likely to graduate from a 2- or 4-year college program. Even in regions where provincial or territorial governments subsidize tuition or higher learning institutions themselves, RESPs in the Canada Learning Bond can actually help offset other post-secondary education costs, such as books and living expenses. So you'll see one thing that not everyone necessarily knows about RESPs is that they can be used to cover not just tuition, but as we're pointing out in the last bullet there, books, living expenses, etc. So they are, in fact, quite flexible.
Thanks, Fernand. Now to introduce SmartSAVER's online Canada Learning Bond application and how it can assist public caregivers, I'd like to introduce Kayla Basili, SmartSAVER's Marketing Director.
Thanks, May. So I think we're just going to advance the slides to the next section. And what you're going to be looking at is a screenshot of SmartSAVER.org, which is our new online RESP starter and Canada Learning Bond application. This is accessed by clicking I'm ready, start my RESP on SmartSAVER.org, which is circled here in yellow. I really encourage all of you to take a look through the application and to test out the process for yourself. The application is available to families in English with support in French, Mandarin, Spanish, and Punjabi. A fully French version of the application is also in development and will be available in the coming weeks. For those applying as a public primary caregiver, which Fernand was talking about as well, the application can be completed in either French or English. We'll show you this complete process here over the next few minutes. In this step, we include a brief overview of the process. Start My RESP assembles all of the information required for the Federal Canada Learning Bond application and transmits it securely and confidentially to the financial institution you select. The selected financial institution follow-ups with the applicant within 2 to 3 business days to meet and sign the application. Dawn from RBC, who's speaking next, will cover all of the specific details on the process from the perspective of child welfare agencies. The application, on average, takes less than 10 minutes to complete, and as I mentioned, includes a dedicated stream for public primary caregivers, which you see here labeled with a B. For a public caregiver applying on behalf of a child, the child's name, date of birth, and social insurance number is required. And as Fernand mentioned, your business name, number, and contact information is also required. In this step, the application collects all of the information required for the Federal Canada Learning Bond form. The process starts by requesting permission to apply for the Canada Learning Bond and Canada Education Savings Grant. Then a financial institution must be selected. This financial institution will establish the RESP account with no fees and with no minimum contribution. Next, the child's information is required, including the name, date of birth, and social insurance number for the child. Finally, we require the applicant to include the name, business number, and contact information for their agency. If any questions arise, we also offer live support for all applicants through our toll-free number, which is 1-855-RESP-CLB. And then this is the final screen you will see once the application has been submitted. We can also offer your agency a dedicated URL or web address which links directly to the SmartSAVER application. This can be used to help track and report applications submitted through your agency. It also allows us to provide some financial support for the applications you help generate. If you're interested in learning more about a unique URL or specific link to access the application for your agency, you can contact me, Kayla, here at SmartSAVER directly, and my information will be included in the follow-up email process. And that really covers the basics of our online RESP and Canada Learning Bond application. I'm going to turn it back over to May for our next question period.
Thanks, Kayla. If you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box. Looking at the Q&A box, I see there is a question for Fernand from Brant CAS. The question is, what is the income threshold for low-income families?
So the current threshold for low income for 2015 is $44,701, and these are indexed with each new tax year. So they tend to go slightly up each year. By the way, for the additional grant, so the kind of middle income bracket, if you will, for 2015 is at $89,401. So low income below $44,701, and then middle income below $89,401.
Thanks, Fernand. Our next question is from FACS Niagara.
Okay, so if we discharge a child and we continue to provide or contribute to the RESP as per the directive, without knowing the parental income, do we still provide a top-up to the previous rate provided by the agency, or how would we determine the new rate in absence of income info of the parent?
Right. So, and I have colleagues with me who can correct me if I'm on the wrong track, but so the situation, child is discharged and contributions continue to be made to the RESP. All of the income testing, in fact, happened on our side in collaboration with the Canada Revenue Agency. So in terms of the 20% versus 10% and all of that stuff and Canada Learning Bond eligibility, those tests will happen behind the scenes.
Perfect.
There's another question from Linda. Many Ontario CASs already have a working relationship with a bank to open RESPs on an ongoing basis. Is there some advantage to applying through SmartSAVER? Kayla?
So the SmartSAVER online application really helps ease the process. So there is we encourage people to go directly to a financial institution if you have a relationship there. The online application is really designed to facilitate that warm introduction to an RESP provider who has committed to establishing an account with no fees and with no minimum contribution. So by all means, we encourage you to continue to work with your local financial institution who you have a relationship with, but the online application also helps facilitate that process and make it a little bit easier if you don't.
Kayla spoke about how the application is filled out and transmitted. Let's turn now to Dawn Osborne, RBC Royal Bank's Senior Manager of Registered Plans, who will explain how the financial institution that receives the application completes the process with you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, May, and to SmartSAVER as well for this opportunity to participate in this call. Royal Bank has been in the RESP business for over 30 years. And the RESP is just one suite of its registered product offering in our branch network. The Royal Bank RESP has no operating fee and offers all the federal and provincial incentives that are available. These federal incentives include the Canada Learning Bond, the grant, and the additional grants that Fernand had walked through in his earlier presentation. As May mentioned, there is no contribution required to open up the RESP. As well, Fernand mentioned there's a $25 fee that's provided to cover the administration fees of the RESP. What the Royal Bank does with that fee is it credits the fee directly to the RESP and treats that as earned income within the plan. So that $25 fee goes directly to the benefit of Royal Bank was selected as part of a national process as the RESP provider of choice for children in care in 2008. Alberta and Ontario are the two major provinces that are taking advantage of this program. The main thing that we offer as that provider is reporting out to the agencies at the end of December and at the end of March 31st. The individual child care agency receives a summary report which gives a summary of all the plans they have opened with us. It includes the plan number, the beneficiary name, the grant, bond, and contributions made, as well as any redemptions, and of course the total dollar value on hand. There is also a summary report provided to the provincial ministry. This summary report provides an overall summary of the number of plans each CAS has, the contributions, and the grants received for each one of those agencies. On the next slide, I'm just going to cover the process that we just talked about the grant and bond application once it's completed on the SmartSAVER site. The information that you enter on the SmartSAVER site is automatically securely routed to the financial institution that you select. In this case, I'm just going to walk through the Royal Bank flow because obviously that's the one I'm most aware of. So as I said, that information is automatically routed to our Royal Bank, and our call center, our advice center, will contact the CAS representative at the number that is provided, and they'll then book an appointment at that representative branch of choice. So Linda, you had talked about what happens if we already have an existing relationship. Well, what you can do when you get that call is you can say, I want to deal with this bank as we already have our RESPs open for other children in our care. They will then book you with the representative in which you've dealt with before. Using the SmartSAVER will then get that application to the branch in a very efficient manner, and at the meeting, the Royal Bank advisor will have a completed copy of that application form ready to be signed. So that just takes away some of the administrative work of getting that piece of paper completed. The bank advisor, along with the CAS representative, will then open an RESP in the usual manner and obtain the signatures and provide the appropriate documents back to the CAS representative for their records. And that is it from a flow of the application process. If you have any questions on this, as May suggested, if you wanted to type them in the Q&A, I can certainly take them now. May, I'll turn this back over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Don. And just to finish off that last part, once the meeting happens and the paperwork is signed, RBC or any other financial institution you choose to work with through the application is responsible for submitting the completed application to the federal government, and processing takes place, and any Canada Learning Bond deposit is then made directly into the account. Is that right, Don?
Yes, May, that's absolutely correct. And we'll also do our validation and verification of the application forms to make sure that everything is completed properly.
Okay, that's great. We have a question from Rolanda Murray. If I submit a group of applications for kids in care all at one time, will the bank rep be able to deal with them as a group? Don?
Yes, Rolanda, I would expect they could. I think that is probably a discussion you want to have with your advisor before you start doing this, just so that they're prepared, that they know they're going to be opening, a group of plans, maybe 5 or 6 plans at once, as opposed to just one. But yes, there's nothing to prevent that being done. And that's a great idea.
The next question is from Brant CAS. Does RBC require agencies to now use this process, or can we continue to contact our rep directly?
Brant, you can continue to contact your rep completely, whichever process works best for you. This is such an efficient way to open complete that grant application. It's a really good opportunity to use.
A question from Penny Harper. If we have a contact at our local RBC branch that we deal with, is it still easier in the future to fill out the SmartSAVER form for each new RESP?
I think, Penny, I believe SmartSAVER is the quicker way to do it, just because, as May reiterated, it has all the information you need in a very, very front-facing, friendly manner. But, certainly feel free to have that discussion with your local advisor about what works best for them.
Next, we have a question from Jennifer Ellis. To my understanding, our agency directive was to only open RESPs with a $500 minimum. Is this not correct?
So this is Fernand jumping in. As Don's reiterated, there are in fact no contributions required, but perhaps what was meant here might have been the Canada Learning Bond. I'm not quite sure, but just to reiterate, in the context of kids in care and the Canada Learning Bond, there are no contributions required. Rather, the application goes through, and presuming that everything's okay in terms of the child's eligibility, at least $500 will be deposited in terms of the Canada Learning Bond.
Yes, the account can actually be opened with no contribution because the financial institutions understand that the minimum first deposit of the Learning Bond is $500. There is one more question. Farrell Haynes has a question. While the opening of RESPs may be short, is there a way to shorten the time period to transfer RESPs?
The main deterrent to completing an RESP in a timely manner is getting the transfer form completed properly. But other than that, I'm really not aware of any way to expedite that transfer of funds.
Okay, thank you, Don. We do have a couple of other questions. A question from Brant CAS. Does RBC report to the Ministry the number of RESPs transferred or just the current number of RESPs open?
Just the current number of RESPs opened.
And a question from Rolanda. How does it work for the retroactive payments for the CLB when the child has not always been in care?
Yeah, and this is Fernand. I can speak to this one. The way that it works is regardless of the context, whether the child is in care or not, the application for the Canada Learning Bond will be tested, and previous eligibility for the bond is assessed by the Canada Revenue Agency, and whether they were in or not, the eligibility will be still measured, and the child will catch whatever number of $100 increments would have been applicable to that child.
Since there are no more questions, that concludes today's session. Thank you to Fernand, Kayla, and Dawn for your presentations today, and thank you to our participants. We hope you found the session useful. We will be sending you a follow-up document summarizing today's session, and we'll also email you when the recording of the session becomes available. Finally, please do contact us if you'd like to talk further or if you have any other questions. Thank you.